Before history is written, it's played. Before it's frozen in time, it's fought one shift at a time. Before it's etched in silver, it's carved in ice. What happens next will last forever.
The Stanley Cup Final continues. Oilers, Panthers on ABC and ESPN Plus.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
The following podcast includes explicit language, not restricted to words beginning with F, S, B, and Q.
Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of June 10th, 2024. On this week's show, we'll talk about how the Boston Celtics took a 2-0 lead in the NBA Finals, and if there's anything the Dallas Mavericks can do to come back. Cricket journalist Peter Della Penna also joins us to discuss the United States' victory over Pakistan at the T20 World Cup and whether it was truly one of the biggest upsets in sports history. And finally, we'll speak with American track legend Butch Reynolds, whose unjust suspension at the height of his career is the subject of a new ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, False Positive. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the book The Queen and the host of an upcoming slow burn season on the rise of Fox News. Also in D.C. is Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. And given that he was out last week, he's officially the only man in America who has not expressed an opinion about Caitlin Clark in the last 8 to 12 days.
True. Possibly not even in my house. No, that's not true. My wife did ask me what I thought about her getting left off of the Olympic team. And I just said, it's probably the right decision. I think we can move on from there. That's my take.
Opinion expressed. With us from Palo Alto is Slate's Joel Anderson. And last week, Joel, you did a great story about the Oakland A's and their horrible owner, John Fisher. For all our pal Pablo Torre show, Pablo Torre Finds Out. We will direct people to how to listen to that on our show page. But I'm just glad you got an opportunity to really go deep on your favorite sport, baseball.
Well, I mean, are the Oakland A's baseball? I mean, I guess that's really the question, right? A friend of mine was like, I didn't know you were doing anything on baseball. I was like, well, I mean, technically it was the Oakland A's, so I don't know if we really have to consider it that. But yeah, man, it was a lot of fun.
The story was really about Bay Area protest movements, I think, is more in your wheelhouse.
I think so, yeah. And really about, the people of Oakland and the history, the cultural history of the city. So, yeah, I think it was right in my wheelhouse. And, yeah, man, Pablo was kind enough to invite me on his show and let me mess it up for a little bit. So, yeah, man, I had a good time. And, man, I mean, they paid for me to go to a bar. So, I mean, what else, what else could you ask for, right?
It was great, and folks should listen, and we will direct them to it at our show page. Now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. In this week's bonus episode, we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Lakers coaching search, Dan Hurley, JJ Redick, which is dumber, hiring a college coach or a podcaster. To hear our analysis of that, you have to be a Slate Plus member. If you are a Slate Plus member, you can hear it right now. If you don't subscribe, there are two ways for you to hear it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangoutplus to get access wherever you listen.
The Dallas Mavericks are flying back down the court, trailing by 5 late in the fourth quarter of Game 2 of the NBA Finals. Near the top of the key, Kyrie Irving's bounce pass found P.J. Washington streaking toward the basket, with 2 Boston Celtics behind them giving chase. At worst, it looked like Washington was going to get fouled on the layup attempt and have a chance to put the Mavericks within a possession of a tie game. But here's what happened.
Here's Irving. Washington drives, blocked by White. Oh, what a block from Derek White.
As you heard from ESPN's Mike Breen, Celtics guard Derek White came over the top to swat Washington's shot off the glass and into the hands of Drew Holiday. It was an effort that punctuated the smothering, relentless defensive effort of the Celtics in their 105-98 win over Dallas to take a 2-0 lead in the finals. Josh, the Celtics have, empirically and otherwise, been the best team in the NBA all season and have played like it in defending their home court against the Mavericks. Have you seen enough to think that they'll be able to do what they couldn't do 2 years ago in the finals against Golden State? Finish the job.
Empirically and otherwise. Mike Breen also said a little bit later in assessing the replay that PJ Washington was fouled. Just wanted to note that. I
think he's fouled twice, actually.
Celtics just getting it's the smothering defense.
They call it.
Smothering defense.
Smothering defense. Push a guy in the back and then smack his hand.
It's not a foul unless the whistle blows.
Yeah.
Classic Boston defender, Joel Anderson. No, I mean I think we've seen enough to conclude that this is a bad matchup for the Mavericks. What were the Mavericks doing in carving up the Western Conference? They had this duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving that were looking like the best offensive backcourt in the history of the NBA. They were also putting other teams' defenses in impossible situations where if, Luka wasn't scoring at will, he was, throwing lobs to Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. There was just nothing anybody could do to stop this Dallas offense. And the Dallas defense was, maintaining their kind of surprising late season turn towards being elite as well. And what's happened in the finals is that against one of the better defensive teams maybe ever, or at least in modern NBA annals, the Mavericks have kind of reverted to being just a two-man team, that these role players have not been as useful, both due to defensive strategies that Boston has employed and also just Dallas missing a lot of open shots. And so, Luka has been himself in terms of scoring, making kind of impossible, step back jumpers. But Boston's defense has really done a number on Kyrie Irving, which I think was not something that folks had anticipated despite Boston's defensive brilliance. And, the Gafford-Lively tandem has really been shut down, Stefan. The lobs that Dallas was getting in the Western playoffs have just not been there. And I think there's an argument to be made that Dallas can come back a little bit, which I can get to when the mic gets passed back to me. But it felt like Dallas's best chance to steal a game was game 2, and Boston could not make a three-pointer. I mean, Boston sometimes just has these cold shooting games, and the fact that they still were able to win despite having a really bad shooting night is just a really bad sign for Dallas.
Well, Dallas also had a bad shooting night. Everybody other than Doncic or Irving, first 2 games, 5 for 24 from 3. That's not going to work. But it does seem like a tactical shift is what made the difference in game 2. Luka got his 32 points and his triple-double while wearing like some sort of chest wrap because he was listed as questionable before the game with a chest contusion. But nobody else could do anything. It does seem like the Celtics just decided to, and talked about it, they were going to let Luka get his. He had his triple-double, but they were going to defend the others more closely. And that prevented Luka from having outlets.
So randomly this weekend, I was watching an old New England Patriots, Indianapolis Colts playoff game.
I'm going to need a little bit more explanation for this.
Yeah, I know, right? So the Peyton Manning era Colts versus the Bill Belichick defense. And one thing that typified those games is that Peyton Manning is an amazing one-man offense. Like when you depend on him to put everybody in the right position, and most teams you have a week to prepare, and you're moving on to another game plan. And so it's like you can just kind of get blitzed by this Peyton Manning offense because it seems sort of improvisational, and he's just sort of figuring it out on the fly. He's like reading your defense or whatever. But the thing that always sort of happened in the playoffs is that Peyton Manning and those Colts became a little bit easier to defend because they were, there wasn't a lot of variety in the offense, right? Like, because, Peyton Manning is giving you his best on every play. Like, he's giving you his best call against the defense, play after play after play after play during the regular season. And there's only so much more ceiling you can go in the postseason. And so it made me think, Josh, of this Mavs offense, which so much is, hey, Luka, probe, figure something out. It's like, either you create for yourself or you make the defense collapse and create a shot for someone else. Well, against a great defense, a long defense, an active defense that is totally comfortable with like you slowing it down and like, all right, well, we're just going to wait on you to do something, but we'll hold everybody else down, right? Like we're going to make sure that nobody else gets off. You become a lot easier to defend. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about, Josh. I mean, it was kind of a stretch of an analogy, but it made me think of that this weekend. As again, the Celtics just successfully cut off all these other avenues. And it's not just, you mentioned at the top, like this 2-man offense, man, like, Kyrie Irving has been really, really bad. And it's not just in the finals. Our friends, Vinny Goodwill, Dan Devine over at the Ball Don't Lie podcast network, they pointed this out that first of all, that Kyrie is the smallest player on the floor. So he's got to deal with like either Drew Holiday, who's built like an NFL safety, or Derek White, who's much taller and longer. And Kyrie has not played well against the Celtics all year long. Now, that's a total of 4 games, but in those 4 games, Kyrie has 70 points on 31 of 80 shooting. He's 4 from 22 from 3, hasn't made a three-pointer in any of these finals games so far. He has a 13-7 assist-to-turnover ratio. That's not even 2-1. And he's taken 4 free throws in 120 minutes against the Celtics this season. So, like, the thing is that the Celtics have decided, and they've seemingly been able to figure out, like, hey, we'll let Luka do what he needs to do. Like, he's a tough person to defend. He's going to get his. But everybody else, they're going to have problems. And if Kyrie can't hit a three-pointer going forward, right, if he can't get to the free throw line, if he can't shoot a little bit more efficiently or figure out a way to get these shots up over Derek White or Drew Holiday, then, I mean, it's kind of hard to see this series going, another, more than 5 games, right?
Kyrie has played so poorly that people are going to stop talking about how he's mature and a good person now. Is that how this works? No, I think that analysis is totally spot on. And you mentioned Drew Holiday and Derek White. I mean, the video that I saw, watched during the game and then was watching the replay last night was of Jaylen Brown just totally harassing Kyrie with tenacious on-ball defense into a traveling violation. And that's the strength of these Celtics, is that for most teams in the NBA, you have to compromise. Are you going to put in your best defensive lineup? Or are you going to put in your best offensive lineup? And the Celtics' best lineup is their best offensive lineup and their best defensive lineup. That's why they're the best team in the league. And I think you said it, Joel, like with Luka, the Celtics' kind of great individual defense is kind of wasted just because he's so good that it doesn't really matter what you do with him or who you put on him. He can cook anybody. It's just like the best offensive players are better at offense than the best defensive players are at defense. But Kyrie Irving, for how skilled, I mean, LeBron James is calling him the most gifted player in the history of basketball. I mean, for how skilled he is, how good he is.
Strong.
A little strong. But like, he is stoppable. Like, he is a guy just because of his body type, because of his size, because of his game, like length is going to bother him, like strong defense is going to bother him, and it has. And I think the case for Dallas is that they're going back home. Role players will play better at home, and the Celtics. I mean, I don't know if this is a case for Dallas or not, but like they have a tendency to just kind of barf up turnovers, occasionally barf up games, kind of like the great Warriors teams did. Like in the Warriors dynasty, they never really solved the problem of them just like randomly throwing the ball out of bounds like a crazy number of times, considering how great they are. And like that's, we should transition into talking about Jason Kidd's poor attempt at mind games. But like, even if we were to stipulate that Jaylen Brown is great, like he dribbles the ball off his foot a lot, he travels, he throws the ball out of bounds. And I think on the road, especially if Dallas gets a lead early, if you get the livelies and the Derek Jones is like, if Derek Jones makes threes, if Josh Green makes threes, it's like, it just seems like if Dallas can like get momentum, get game 3, there's more rest in the finals than in the other series. So Luka can get a little bit healthier. Then it doesn't seem crazy to me that Dallas can, eke out a couple of wins at home. And the longer the series goes, like, I think Dallas's only real chance here is like Kristaps Porzingis was a little hobbled at the end of game 2. The Celtics are clearly not as good with Porzingis on the bench. And maybe if the series extends a little bit, then maybe another Celtics guy gets hurt or gets, hobbled a little bit. Like, Dallas just needs to figure out a way to extend the series, get Boston a little tight, and maybe who knows what can happen. But like right now, it's not looking great.
So you're saying what Dallas needs to do is injure some Boston players. That's their best
figure out a way to extend the series.
Can they get Kelly Olynyk because he's around? He can pull somebody's shoulder out of socket or something, maybe.
And it's the NBA. There are going to be adjustments. Boston adjusted its offensive game plan, and you mentioned Jason Kidd trying to troll the Celtics by saying that Jaylen Brown was their best player. And what does Jason Tatum do? He comes out and doesn't dominate. It wasn't fuel for him to go out and score 35. Instead, he and Brown he mostly facilitated. They combined for 19 assists in that game. They let Tatum attract doubles and look for cutters. And Sunday night, it was Drew Holiday who had 26 points. So the Celtics have shown the ability to adjust, but these are NBA teams. Dallas is going to adjust when they get home, and I would be surprised if this ends up as a sweep. Luka's that good, and the role players have been great for this team in the playoffs. And Kyrie, he's been neutralized, and it's a terrible matchup for him, but he remains a good, if not the greatest player of all time. And
skilled, Stefan.
Skilled player of all time. So would you be surprised if Kyrie got 25 next game? I would not.
No, of course not. And I just circling back to Jason Kidd's attempts at mind games. It reminds me of, and I'm going to make another obscure reference possibly here, to the early aughts rap battle between Jay-Z and Nas, where Nas says in his song Ether, "With whiskers like a rat compared to beans, you're whack." What he meant was, hey, Jay-Z, your boy, Beanie Siegel, he raps better than you. He's meant to divide and conquer his crew. And it's like, come on, Rockefeller Records, they were, at least at the moment, tighter than that. It didn't work. So, the Celtics have been here long enough and have had to kind of navigate that really awkward dynamic between whose team is it? Is it Jalen's or Justin? Or Jalen's or Jason's? And they've had to navigate that the whole time, and they seem to be pretty strong for it, right? Like, it didn't seem like that has caused any dissension with them. But the one thing I was thinking about too is that, like, the whole proof of concept for the Mavs, like, people thought in this game, well, man, the Celtics are a mess, man. They're going to, like you said, spit up all over themselves, turn over late. They don't have any late game killers. Well, it's really tough to turn your late game killers loose if you can't keep the game close, right? And like, this wasn't a blowout or anything, but the Celtics were firmly in control of it. And, with a minute to go, they were up 5-7 points. So if you can't get within a possession of them to even threaten them or to scare them, then it's going to be an issue. But and the other piece of that too is that, like, for all of that, the Mavs' alleged late game heroics, they're a really bad free throw shooting team. So, like, they're missing all these other opportunities as well. Like, it's just, I don't know. I mean, maybe, I'm not saying that the Western Conference was overrated this year, but we're just seeing kind of right now that if you leave the Celtics out of it, like, maybe there just wasn't another great team this year, right? And that the Celtics are as good as they've been billed all year long. And all these other teams is just kind of like, well, it depends on the matchup here or who's healthy here. But, like, I felt like maybe we talked ourselves into thinking that the Mavericks were a great team coming into the finals. And now it's just like, oh, yeah, no, they've got some weaknesses. They've got some vulnerabilities, and they're showing up right now.
They definitely have some weaknesses, but the Celtics plus minus with Porzingis on the floor is like hugely positive. And if he's hurt, if he's not able to go, or if he's compromised, I mean, you saw it at the end of game 2. Like, the Mavs were like beating Porzingis down the court. At the end, they had to take him out and sub in Al Horford. And so if he's not able to go, or if he's not able to protect the rim or like knock down jumpers like he was, then the Celtics are going to have vulnerabilities too. So I just think it just seems like a little bit of a failure of imagination to me to think that these next couple of games are going to go like the first two did. But Joel, why don't we end with the other coach in the series, Joe Mazzulla. Vinny Goodwill, getting a lot of run in this segment, asked him how he felt about this being the first NBA Finals since 1975 with two Black coaches. And Mazzulla's response was, are they Christian coaches? He's not really been engaging on kind of questions about race and history. When asked about if he got to meet the royal family, this was in 2022, he said Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Like he's obviously really embraced a Christian identity, and given opportunities to talk about race and coaching or race in general, he's really kind of shied away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about Joe Mazzulla. I know he played basketball at West Virginia, and it could just be that he's really more excited about the Mazzulla part of his life than the, I'm a Black man in America part of his life. And it's totally fair for him to not want to discuss that. Like, I just want to make that clear that, that is a burden that Black coaches have to deal with, that white coaches very often don't. They don't have to talk about, being pioneers or, whatever sort of milestones there are related to race. Like, they just are allowed to be coaches. And I can totally understand a coach that is Black or identifies as Black or, it seems to be ethnically Black or whatever. And they just be like, I don't want to talk about that in front of people because I'm not going to win. My words are going to get twisted, or it's not an important part of my life. And you can kind of see it too, because like Sharon Moore sort of did the same thing during Michigan's run to the national championship when he was asked about being a Black coach. And I remember when Hubie Davis, was named the head coach at North Carolina, and, they talked about it, and he said, well, I'm also proud of my wife, my white wife, so like this is kind of becoming a thing. But I mean, I think, it was fair for Vinny to ask that question. I think I'm always just a little surprised that guys are not like, obviously it's important in some ways. Like, I mean, this has not happened very often. It's not the most important part of my life, but like, if people want to take some sort of inspiration from that, then great. You can say that, diffuse it, and move on, and it doesn't become a story. But that doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that Joe Mazzulla is. So I just wonder if there's something else going on there.
Yeah, it just seems weird. I mean, it is striking that this is only the first time since 1975 that the finals have had two Black head coaches. And it is something that, sure, the NBA should talk about how great it is, but also it's embarrassing to the NBA. And, Jason Kidd talked about it, but Jason Kidd will talk about a lot of things. But for Mazzulla to just sort of dismiss it, I mean, Vinny Goodwill's story said that there was a stunned silence in the room because it was a weird answer. How it's, these are, and Mazzulla is not clearly someone who seems particularly interested in or comfortable being interviewed, doing press conferences. It does not seem like the favorite part of the job for him. But how difficult is it to just say, yeah, it's kind of cool, and I wish there were more of us on the sidelines and in the finals, and we got to do a better job of the league of promoting from within, from our incredibly deep and talented pool of assistant coaches, a lot of whom don't end up getting head coaching jobs.
Up next, Stefan and I talk to cricket journalist Peter Della Penna about Team USA's massive win over Pakistan. Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Get 3% daily cash back when you use Apple Card to buy a new iPhone 15 or pair of AirPods at Apple. You can choose to grow it at 4.4% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account through Apple Card Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings and Apple Card by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com. On Thursday at the Grand Prairie Cricket Stadium in Dallas, the U.S. men took on Pakistan in what seemed like a massive mismatch. The U.S. had never played in a T20 World Cup, while cricketing powerhouse Pakistan had reached the final 2 years ago. But when both teams finished their innings, it was all tied up at 159, and you know what that means. It's time for a super over. The U.S. batting first made 18 for 1 before Pakistan had its chance. Here's how it ended.
The red, white and blue of USA has overcome the 2022 finalists. The stars and stripes are flying high and proudly in Dallas, Texas.
Joining us now is American cricket journalist and evangelist Peter Della Penna, who was at the game in Dallas. Peter, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you guys for having me.
One comparison I saw, Peter, is that the U.S. beating Pakistan in cricket is like Pakistan beating the U.S. in basketball. That might be an imperfect analogy, but tell us, how big of an upset was this really?
Yeah, it's USA's most famous win. There's no doubt about that. I think some of the other comparisons I've seen were maybe a little bit hyperbolic. I think the issue is that most people in America don't realize that USA even has a cricket team. And so the fact that this result happened, it was most people's first introduction to the fact that not only does USA have a team, but USA is actually co-hosting the World Cup, and that they're capable of beating a Pakistan team. But if you look at the team in terms of their quality and their competitiveness, they actually beat Bangladesh 2-1 in a series in Houston just prior to the World Cup in May, which gave a lot of people in the cricket community a sense that, hey, this team is on the rise, and they had the capacity to spring an upset in this tournament, which they did. So I think the awareness and the publicity that they've gotten from this victory has been quite unprecedented in terms of making people open their eyes to what is going on in terms of the U.S. cricket community. So I've seen in some places where there's been comparisons calling it the miracle on grass, almost akin to the miracle on ice, USA beating Russia in 1980 Olympic ice hockey. I think that's a little bit extreme, because you have to keep in mind that most of the players in this USA cricket team are full-time professionals, which obviously wasn't the case in an amateur ice hockey team in 1980. So again, it's not quite as far-fetched for Pakistan to lose to USA, but it was still an impressive victory nonetheless.
Yeah, professionals, I think that would surprise a lot of people. Just starting right there, the India Times wrote in a story that this wasn't Pakistan losing to India B, India's B team. It was Pakistan losing to India H-1B, referring to temporary H-1B visas given to foreign workers. The story noted that the U.S. team has 6 cricketers of Indian descent. So who are these guys?
A lot of them have come through the traditional migration pathways. I mean, that's been the story of U.S. cricket for 60 plus years now. The composition of the national team has always mirrored migration patterns. In the 1930s and 40s, a big bulk of the cricket community in the U.S. was Australian and British expats. You had things like the Hollywood Cricket Club, founded by Australian and British actors out in California. And then through the 1960s and 70s, the dynamic shifted a lot more towards West Indian immigrants. You'd have a lot of players in the team from Guyana, Jamaica, those kind of places. And then really the .com boom is what shifted the makeup of the USA national team more towards being heavily Indian and South Asian oriented. And you see that through today. I mean, from 1975 up until 2017, every captain for USA was of West Indian heritage. Since 2017, every captain for USA has been of Indian heritage.
It sounds a lot like every sort of major sport, or even soccer, where the U.S. for decades and still looks for dual nationals. But I imagine that the requirements for being on the U.S. team aren't quite as stringent as they are in other sports. And the ability then to recruit a decent team of expats who are here for professional reasons cranks up a little bit. I mean, give us a sense of how big the cricket playing community in the United States is. How good are the local leagues? And is there an actual recruiting network where players like him can rise up and be asked to play for the U.S. instead of their native countries?
Well, you've got kind of two ways that you can play for USA. One is be a citizen, and then two is qualifying on residency. So the ICC rule is that if you are a resident for 3 years in your adopted country, and you can represent them that way. So you'll get guys like that. The current national team, only about 30 to 40% of them are actual U.S. citizens. You've got Stephen Taylor, who was born in Florida, raised in Florida, Nasish Kenjige, born in Alabama, Jesse Singh's born in New York, and the rest, more or less, are guys who kind of fit a different category of player, who have migrated to USA sometimes for work reasons and sometimes for cricket reasons. With the advent of Major League Cricket, the franchise league, there's been a big push to recruit guys, especially from South Africa, to come over to the U.S., and they'll give them a professional contract. And then if they live here for 3 years, they can qualify that way. Again, if you come to the U.S., you get noticed in leagues like Sorab did, and you get funneled up the pathway that way. There's about, by some estimates, anywhere from 100 to 200,000 amateur club cricketers who play every weekend in the U.S., and that's almost every state. I mean, I've seen cricket played in Hawaii. Hawaii's got a huge, extensive history of cricket in that state going back to King Kamehameha. You go out there, they play cricket in Kapiolani Park right outside Waikiki Beach. Combine it in Texas, California, Washington State, Idaho, Utah, Michigan. I went to university at Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska, and that's where I first played my cricket matches when I was a student out there in Nebraska. And you would travel to Kansas and Iowa and Oklahoma and the Dakotas to play cricket. Literally, you can find cricket just about anywhere. You just have to look really hard to find it is the issue. It's almost a secret society in the sense that you have to know where to look. Cricket is all around you. I grew up in New Jersey. I didn't know cricket existed in New Jersey when I was growing up, but it was literally all around me in the places near where I went to high school in Montclair and West Orange at Bloomfield Park and Watsising Park. I had no clue it existed.
So the T20 World Cup is one of various and sundry cricket World Cups. This is the World Cup for the shortest version of the game, and it's being hosted by the United States and also the West Indies. And Peter, you've been traveling around. You weren't just in Dallas. You're in New York currently, where there have been games, including the enormous showdown between India and Pakistan that was on Sunday. And one of the things that's really been notable to me in kind of following your coverage, you've been posting photos of, and readouts of conversations you've been having with fans, is that a lot of folks have traveled a long distance, especially fans of India and Pakistan, to see their teams play. And a lot of people have felt like they're not getting a great deal. The tickets are too expensive, and that the experience hasn't necessarily been what they've hoped for at this World Cup. What's been kind of your takeaway from those conversations that you've been having?
I think it's a case of the level of expectation for the price point has been where the disconnect has happened. If you go to the Texas venue, it was really hard to find any fan who didn't have a great time or fans who were disappointed with how things were laid out and what was offered to them.
And there were about 6,000 people at the U.S.-Pakistan match?
Yeah, there was the official attendance for that was 5,720 for USA-Pakistan, and the capacity of that venue is 7,200. The main seats were all full. Where you had pockets of empty seats were in the highest priced premium, what were billed as the luxury seats in the stadium there. And that's been mirrored in New York. You've had pretty good turnout and ticket sales in the main sections, but the premium seats, the lounge areas, where on camera, that's where they get the most visibility because of the way the configuration is in the stadium. You want to be in a cricket stadium, you want to be behind the bowler's arm. You want to have like a down the field look at the bowler running in, bowling to the batsman. And so those are the best seats in the house. And in New York, with the exception of the India-Pakistan game, they've been 95% empty because they've been so ridiculously overpriced. And people
like what, like $2,500?
Yeah, I mean, for the India-Pakistan game, those seats were priced between $5,000 and $10,000, and based on my experience going through that box early in the week and interacting with journalists who were there yesterday, you go into the premium suite, you go into a luxury suite in a big four sport, you're expecting, the creme de la creme of accommodations and treatment, and you're not getting that at the cricket venue. And so a lot of fans in New York in particular feel like they've just been fleeced, and they're not happy about it. And because of that, the word has gotten out, and a lot of people just weren't taking the bait. They said, we've heard what's being included in this price package for those premium seats. And you talk to fans. I interacted with a fan from Chicago who's said, I paid $9,000 to go to the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, and I've got Bulls season tickets. I sit courtside for the Bulls, and I pay $1,000 a seat to sit behind the visitors bench at the United Center. And I know what a quality experience is supposed to be, and I came to this venue in New York, and for what I paid to sit in premium seating, it's nowhere close to resembling the premium experience that you get in other sports venues and events and other things I've taken part in across America. And when you hear that kind of thing from fans, it's really jarring. And I think it's a wake-up call to the administrators and organizers running this event that there's definitely a reason why there's been so many empty seats in New York. And it's because the value just hasn't been there.
And to be clear, they built this. They're not playing a giant stadium. You can't just plop a cricket match into a conventional American arena. They built it's a temporary facility. It's got 34,000 seats. It's going to be taken down and moved to the next place that needs a temporary stadium. The larger question then is, why is the tournament even being held in the United States? Is this like with, say, rugby or other sports trying to make inroads into what might be a U.S. market? And do you think that might be successful?
Well, the ICC at times is talking out of both sides of their mouth on this issue. They will say publicly, we're trying to grow the game.
That's the international cricket.
Yeah, the International Cricket Council, the ICC, which is the equivalent of FIFA for soccer, okay? The ICC, they awarded the USA co-hosting rights in November 2021, and all the quotes were, oh, this is great. We're going to bring the World Cup to an emerging market. We want to have the same impact that FIFA 94 did in America, and we're going to have an explosion of new fans and this and that. And the marketing and the lead into the event has been almost non-existent. I mean, only cricket fans, the diehards, are the ones who really are aware that this event is happening. You talk to the average man on the street in Texas, anywhere in the vicinity of the stadium in Texas at the Grand Prairie venue, or restaurants, hotel workers, hospitality workers, the people you would expect to have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the community, none of them are aware of the World Cup happening. It's a little bit different in Long Island. There's this venue that they built in Long Island is so monstrous, you would be blind not to be aware that the World Cup is happening on Hempstead Turnpike in Long Island. So the Long Island community is definitely aware, but broader in the five boroughs, it's not had as much publicity outside of the Oculus, where they've got the fan zone in near the World Trade Center. So the ICC is, on one hand, saying, yeah, we want to spread the game, we want to convert new fans, yet the event is behind a paywall in terms of the U.S. host broadcasting rights. It's on Willow TV, which is a subscription channel that you can get it on most cable providers, but it's not part of your basic cable. You don't get Willow TV with ESPN, ESPN2, CNN, Fox News, TNT, TBS, USA, etc. You have to pay an additional $10 a month on top of that just to get the Willow TV channel. So unless you're a hardcore cricket fan, you're never going to see this stuff. And in terms of the ticket pricing, to get in for most games in New York, it's $100 just as a get-in price. In Texas, it was similar. For most games, it was $100. There was a few games where I think it might have been $60 as a get-in price. As a comparison, at the same time the World Cup matches were happening in Texas, you could go 3 miles down I-30 to Globe Life Field and watch a rematch of the World Series. I took an Australian journalist and an Irish journalist to their first baseball game to see the Texas Rangers play the Arizona Diamondbacks, and we got in for $9. So to see a World Series rematch for $9, and then you go to a World Cup match and the get-in price is $60, that's really catering to the hardcore cricket fan. You're not going to get casual sports fans you're hoping to introduce to the game for the first time.
Last question, Peter. So the U.S. is playing India on Wednesday in Long Island. The U.S. has a 2-0 record. They also beat Canada, and India is coming off a win over Pakistan on Sunday, which was presumably watched by hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people around the world, an audience larger than the Super Bowl. So what are you looking for in that U.S.-India match, both in terms of on the pitch and also just the crowd response? And what are your hopes for the U.S. team and the rest of the tournament? Are they going to make it to the knockout rounds, and what are their chances overall?
Well, because Pakistan lost to India, the best that they can do is 4 points. USA is already on 4 points. So at the moment, unless the tiebreakers fall very favorably towards Pakistan in terms of the run differential, which is the main tiebreaker, it's essentially runs scored in the pace that you score them versus runs conceded in the pace at which you concede them. USA would have to lose by an overwhelming margin to India and Ireland to realistically not advance to the next phase of the tournament. So because of that, I think USA will be playing with a bit more freedom. They'll be relaxed. They got nothing to lose. They're going to go in as the underdog against India. And they've got a lot of fans who are rallying behind them. And I mean, just going to interact with some fans yesterday, I spent most of the day at the Citi Field watch party. So there was the overflow for the fans who couldn't get into the actual match at Nassau County. Citi Field, the home of the Mets, they hosted a watch party, and there was about 8,000 fans there. And you talked to a lot of the India fans there, and they said, hey, we're going to the match on Wednesday. We couldn't get in today, but we've got tickets for Wednesday to watch USA and India. And their attitude is, hey, we can't lose. We may have Indian heritage, but our kids are our first generation. They're born and raised in the USA. We support America. So if USA wins, if India wins, we walk away winners. We're not going to walk away losers today or on Wednesday. And I think people, that was kind of something that stood out to me, that fans who previously had their allegiances very tightly aligned with India in terms of the diaspora, because of USA's win over Pakistan and the notoriety and they're getting from that and the extra publicity, they're starting to dig in a bit more and find out a bit more and want to support USA a bit more. And it'll be interesting to see how that happens on Wednesday against India and then against Ireland down in Florida on Friday. And if the results fall their way, allowing USA to advance to the Super 8 stage, then you'll have a lot of more recognition and support for USA, hopefully going forward for that base, because they'll have another handful of matches that they weren't expected to have when the tournament began.
Cricket journalist Peter Della Penna is covering the cricketing powerhouse Team USA during the T20 World Cup. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys again for having me.
Up next, an interview with Butch Reynolds about the new ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, False Positive.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today and get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, Slate listeners. I'm Christina Cauterucci, the host of Slow Burn, Gays Against Briggs. I want to tell you about a special event we're doing at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City on June 13th. To celebrate this new season of Slow Burn and Pride Month, we're hosting an exclusive live taping of the show with special guests, including civil rights activist and Black Lives Matter organizer DeRay McKesson, comedian and singer Esther Fallick, Eric Marcus, the host of Making Gay History, and Sam Feder, director of the Netflix documentary Disclosure, about the depiction of trans people in film and television. We'll dive deeper into this season and talk about the lasting impact of the Briggs Initiative and the continued fight over LGBTQ rights in schools. It'll be the perfect way to celebrate Pride Month this June with LGBTQ stories and voices across generations. Again, that's June 13th at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/slowburn. Hope to see you there.
In 1987, as a junior at Ohio State, Butch Reynolds ran the 400 meters in 44.1 seconds, the second fastest time ever. Sports Illustrated called Reynolds the revelation of the track season. He left Ohio State, turned pro, and set his sights on breaking the world record of 43.86 set by Lee Evans at the 1968 Olympics in the thin air of Mexico City. A 20-year-old world record doesn't deserve an A for altitude next to it any longer, Reynolds said. He would take care of the problem at a meet in Zurich, Switzerland in August 1988. Let's listen to the call by Ron Pickering of the BBC.
And now comes Butch Reynolds, being pushed by Steve Lewis in blue. Reynolds is up to his shoulder. Reynolds is steam past him. And Butch Reynolds is coming away. Oh, 6'3" of him. He brings Steve Lewis with him, the 19-year-old. And Danny Everett will be third. And look at that! He's done it! The world record is his at sea level. And he's murdered it. He's taken it apart. And justice has been done at last.
Justice would soon take on a different meaning for Butch Reynolds. In 1990, he was accused by the International Track Federation of testing positive for the steroid nandrolone. Reynolds denied the charge and was cleared by U.S. track officials and in court, showing that the test result likely was for a female East German athlete. But international track officials didn't budge, and his career and life were upended. Reynolds' story is the subject of a new ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, False Positive. It's directed by Ismail Al-Amin with executive producers, Oscar-nominated cinematographer Bradford Young, and our friend Jonathan Hawk. The film premieres on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. And it's our pleasure now to welcome Butch Reynolds. Hey, Butch.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Before we get into the case, I want you to go back to the world record and what we just listened to. Can you describe the race and that moment in your life for us?
Well, I tell you, just to hear that calling gave me the goosebumps, made the heart jump again. You know, gave me the palpation that I was at that day, August 17th, 1988, 8:42 in the evening. Those memories came back. Zurich, Switzerland was a electrifying place to run. It was one of the best two places to run in the world. And it was the first time I was there, and I know why, because it's very energetic. History things happen there. So I was very honored to run there. Yeah.
So, Mr. Reynolds, so when you broke that record, you broke it by, you brought the record down by more than half a second. And it seemed like, given how long the record had stood, almost 20 years, that given how far you pushed it forward, that maybe it was going to last at least another 20, right? And I kind of thought, and I don't know if you felt this way, that if Michael Johnson didn't get it in 1996, then maybe it was not going to happen again. Were you surprised that, it wasn't, not even, barely a decade that record lasted?
Well, I think two things. One, August 17th, 1988 was the day. So that was the person, the man that God chose to break that 20-year-old world record for the 400 meters. When they talk about GOAT, to me, 20-year world record for 400 meters, that's the GOAT. That's the GOAT. Lee Evans, no matter what, to my personal beliefs. But I would say the next day, August 18th was another day. It was just a day to keep going. Records are meant to be broken, and I always felt that way. 11 years later, after 96, I didn't think Michael had much to run for. And I know you had to go deep to get that type of record. I passed out. These things are hard things to do. And you got to have something to grab. It was challenging for me to say, once I had the world record, I'm going to do it again. Yeah, I wanted to do it again. But do I want to hurt that way? So, yes, it was surprising, but records are meant to be broken.
Yeah, you speak really beautifully in the documentary about the 400 meters as a discipline. And one of your coaches says Butch excelled because he was willing to hurt. It is just it's a beautiful event. It's a really brutal event. It's a strategic event. It's one that requires strength. It's always been my favorite event because it just feels like it's so simple and yet requires your mind, your body, and everything kind of coming together on that day. But what I just wanted to say is about that record, out of all the sports we talk about, it just must feel so unbelievable to know that nobody's ever done it better or faster than you did in the history of the world. And you can't say, we have all these arguments about basketball, right? Like who's the GOAT or any sport, but just to be there on the track on that day. And then for the next many years to know that nobody ever has done it any better. Just how amazing must that feel?
You look at the hard work, the dedication, the sacrifice. And how many times you could have said, I'm going to stop, I'm going to quit. 1987, I lost my son. We don't talk about that as much, but, he lived for 5 hours. And the next 2 days, I was in Oklahoma running the 1987 indoor NCAA championship. So, you talk about, adversity and strength. It started there with a decision. I could have stayed there and not pursued my 1987 career because of the loss. But I took that and humbled up and just kind of focused more on achieving this type of goal.
I'm going to be the guy that has to take us from the high of setting the record in 1988 to the low of what happened in 1990, which you ran a race in Monte Carlo. You finished third. You were randomly selected for a drug test. You say in the documentary you had taken more than 100 drug tests in your career. You never worried for a second. Then you went to New Delhi on the tour. And in New Delhi, you got the news that you had tested positive for a steroid.
Right.
What was that moment like, and what do you remember about it?
I remember that moment was very low, of course, very low. I said, there's no way possible. And I always thought that I would have the opportunity to tell the necessary ones that I didn't do it. I'm not a cheater. I have ethics, values, and morals. I think that's what happens when you start thinking about cheating. I'd rather retire, take my losses, and keep it moving. But when I heard that news, then it was like, okay, I just felt like somebody was trying to set me up. I didn't feel like it was nothing else but that at that time. And so, yeah, I felt very compelled to fight, compelled to say this is a mistake and keep it moving. I never thought in a million years it'd come to this 34 years later, and I'm still talking about this. I never thought that. I never dreamed that, but in my mind, being an Olympic athlete real quick, I always think about the Jesse Owens, 4 years with Hitler and coming back, how he had to be treated. Muhammad Ali, when he threw his medal in the water. And I think about, the 68 Olympic team, not just the Lee Evans, but Tommy Smith and John Carlos. It's like always some issue, surrounding that piece. And I remember, Wilma Rudolph telling me, she said, Butch, you're going to be the legend. You will be the legend. Don't worry. And I didn't know, what she was talking about then because I was in 1988. I wasn't thinking no legend, but she was to me.
You talk a little bit about what it was like, after getting, notification of that test and sort of reeling, right? Like you talked about all the difficulty that you went through as that news is making its way out and you're in the spotlight. How difficult was it to convince people that even that were close to you, that you knew, that you loved, that I didn't do this? Because I think that's the thing that always happens with these tests, right? Is that somebody tests positive and they say, I didn't do it, from Ben Johnson and so on and so forth, from baseball players that were caught up in the Balco scandal. So it must have been really difficult to get people near you.
I think one of the most difficult part when I had to really do the first press conference to deny the accusation. That when I had to tell the world that I did not do this, that was the hardest part of it. Then I had to come back. And when I did that, leaving back from the press conference, all those crazy thoughts goes in your mind at that time. But when I got back, I had to tell, my grandfather and my dad, my uncle who was there for other things, what was going on. And for my grandfather to tell me at that time to clear his name, it kind of reversed that feeling of woe is me to this is a bigger fight. I had to remove me to be able to fight almost.
Yeah, I mean, like Joel was saying, I think the difficult thing for you is that every athlete who tests positive says they didn't do it, right? And I think as fans and as just, we're like, all right, it's just another one of these cases where, in 10 years they'll admit that they did it, but now we got to go through the fiction of pretending. But like as the documentary shows, people might go into this thinking like, all right, it's going to be one side and the other side. I mean, the evidence on your side is so overwhelming that I think that's the thing that you felt, and I think it's the thing people will feel when they watch this. It's infuriating to watch what was done to you and the refusal by International Track and Field to listen to that overwhelming evidence not just of procedural errors, but of actual innocence. And like Stefan said, that it seems pretty clear that it was a case of mistaken identity. And so, when you have all of this evidence in your favor, you must feel like, okay, the truth is on my side. It's inevitable that it's going to come out in my favor.
I try to do this. I try to follow the process. What's the process? My attorneys knew that going through the federation process was going to be the process that we ended up, because they're the judge, jury, and prosecutor. Going the other way, which is the other way, is the federal court way. And the Supreme Court of the United States way was the best way for me to end up getting some type of due process. But following the process, I had to go to the USA Track and Field hearing. Then I had to go to United States Olympic hearing. Then I had to go to the World Governing Body hearing at that time in London. Now, following these hearings, I had a federal court judge and the USA Track and Field and the United States Olympic Committee going through this. So I'm trying to follow the process. Now I'm faced with, I realized that the Supreme Court, even though it gave me exoneration to run, it helped me win $27 million. It didn't give me the exoneration in my life. It didn't give me the credibility that I wasn't a drug user in my life. I didn't live the life of a world record holder, Olympic gold medalist. In my mind, yes, they could not take it from my mind or from my heart, because my environment, what I established for my family, my daughter graduated from law school last week. Okay, so the environment had to be there in order to keep that dream alive. And that's one thing that they didn't do. No matter who believed me or who didn't believe me at that time, I had to go with what they call acceptance. I had to accept who didn't believe me. I had to accept who did believe me and move on and just keep my head up and keep it going. But the opportunities was no longer there. That was the hard part. All my opportunities were gone. Even though in my mind and heart I was innocent, but living that guilty life as a Butch Reynolds, it's just no opportunity. If I wasn't, quote unquote, had a name or was famous per se, I could probably go out underneath the radar a little bit. But, for me, I can't change my name because I can't change the color of my eyes. I can't change who I am. So I had to just accept it through the fire grief process. And the last one was acceptance and move on. And how I moved on was people like Nelson Mandela. I looked at his story. I examined his story. 27 years in jail. He comes out after 27 years in jail, and he's the president of this country in 2 years with his dream in place. He never lost focus. He never lost faith. So I said, if he can do this, I can stay just as strong. It's on 34 years, but that's okay.
Yeah, no one's going to change those green eyes of yours, man. I want to be clear here. This was a crazy 2 years for you and in the sport. In September 1991, the U.S. track and field organization at the time cleared you unanimously. As you said, you went to court. You went to federal court. You withstood appeals. A federal court wound up awarding you $27 million to be paid by the International Track Federation. That was eventually overturned. But on the track, you also fought to be able to run in the 1992 Olympics. And you went to the trials. You got a judge to apply a restraining order that allowed you to run at the Olympic trials. They were delayed for multiple days while this is being cleared up. You delivered this passionate speech to your fellow athletes, urging them to support you and let you run. The international track authorities had been threatening to suspend every U.S. athlete and bar them from the Olympics if you did run. That had to be grueling because you didn't get the support from your fellow runners that you wanted.
You know, in order to make the Olympic trials, I had to have a qualifying time. So the Federation was trying to keep me off the track here in the U.S. for me getting a qualifying time. And the first race I went to was Bruce Jenner. I went to Bruce Jenner's race. I'm getting ready to run. Bruce Jenner instructed his director of his race to remove my blocks from the lane and walk away. And when I looked up and saw what they were doing, you know, the gun went off. So I couldn't get a qualifying time in. So that was the tactic that they was going to try to use to keep me from even getting a qualifying time. So we went to Kezar Invitation, take another 30 seconds, and they was going to give me an opportunity to run. But in order for me to run, I had to have the sheriff or the marshals there to enforce the injunction. So I had to held the race up just in case they was going to pull a Bruce Jenner process on me and take my blocks from me. You know, so my brother was at the phone booth because back then with cell phone wasn't popular, it was they are now. So I said, hey, if they try to pull that, I'm going to distract them for a minute. I'm not going to get off the track. You said they're shooting at this meet at Kezar. And that way it brings the cops there immediately so I can get my injunction to be enforced. But we didn't have to do it. Kezar went ahead, and then that became the fastest time of the world at that time. 49 was the fastest time of the world at that time. So I was an A qualifier, so they could not stop me anymore.
Ms. Rose, earlier in this segment, we talked about everything that has to come together to be an elite 400-meter runner. Like you got it, like body, mind, you know, So everything sort of needs to be in alignment. And after all this goes on, you run for another 10 years, but like in your head, you've had this legal battle, the skepticism of your fellow competitors, the lack of institutional support, and still you ran for another 10 years. What were those 10 years like? It must have felt lonely in some ways, right?
Ooh, lonely, very uncomfortable. But I stayed there in their face for that reason. I could have left that sport after the accusation. I was done then. I was crushed. But it put me on a different path in life. And that was an unrighteous path. The path I was on, even though it was hell, I had to stay on that path of Olympics, of USA. It wasn't easy. But the other path was unbearable. I'm a world record holder. I know the capabilities. I rather love people than hate people.
All right, I want to end by noting something that was not in the documentary, which is amazing. Everyone should watch this documentary. But I feel like you had to be there, like I was, and like Butch Reynolds was, to know how hot it was at the Olympic trials in New Orleans in 1992. I'm from New Orleans. That was absolutely brutal. I don't remember being any hotter than I've been sitting in the stands at the Olympic trials that year. That's one thing. The second thing is, you need to know that you're in the presence of Joel Anderson, who in 1988, the same year you set the world record, Joel was the fastest 10-year-old in America on the track.
All right. Stop. See there? I did not know. You know, But Joel, what event was you the fastest 10-year-old though?
Well, so I ran the 100, and so
Okay.
I had a 13.2. But I will say, I ran my team ran the 4x1 and the 4x4. We got third at nationals. So
Okay.
you know, I was the scratch leg on the 4x4. That was not my event.
See, Joe, what you just did, he just shared this opportunity with his fellow teammates. You know what I'm saying? Good job. He's a teammate guy, you know? I loved it.
And you're talking to a 4x4 gold medalist here. You guys, you know.
Yeah.
You know
You guys have a lot in
Yeah.
common, is what we're saying.
I know what it's like. Yes. Hey, I would give it up too, you know?
The movie is False Positive. It's directed by Ismail Alamin. It premieres on Tuesday at 7 p.m. on ESPN. Everybody should watch it. It is a terrific piece of filmmaking, and the subject is moving, and it will change your opinion, if you had one, about Butch Reynolds and his quest for justice. Butch, thank you so much for coming on the show with us.
I appreciate you guys. Thanks, and God bless.
And now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. In 1987, former Olympian turned sports writer Kenny Moore profiled Butch Reynolds in Sports Illustrated. The piece, published after Reynolds had run his 44.10 and was poised for his world record breakthrough, noted that in addition to running a 10.400, 21.5 200, and 48.1 400, long jumping 23 feet, and playing basketball, Reynolds played one season of football at Archbishop Hoban High School in Akron. On a 1-9 team, missing 3 weeks with a sprained ankle, Moore wrote, Reynolds played both ways, caught 23 passes for a 20.1-yard average, made 31 tackles and 2 interceptions. His football coach, Clemens Karabulad, recalls him always turning up in his office to ask what more he could do to help his struggling team. I couldn't persuade one college coach to consider Harry for a football career, Karabulad was quoted as saying, using Reynolds' given name. They didn't like the way he caught the ball. I said he'd only played one season. Teach him. A couple of coaches even told me he wasn't fast enough. What idiots. When he joined us on the show, I asked Reynolds about his football coach.
Coach Karabulad talked me into playing high school football, okay, my senior year. You know, and he used to come with a Harley Davidson to my house to kind of recruit me to play football. And I'm like, Coach, I am not playing football. But since you came to my house in the hood, like in a Harley Davidson, I'm going to play because you must be something special. And I played for him. He taught me how to have focus. He used to send me Aristotle and different, poetry or different, quotes, in my junior college days. He kept me, focused in that another area, which was great, which was awesome,
Karabulad played defensive end at John Carroll University and got a master's in theology from Kent State, where he wrote his thesis on mysticism, Zen, and Wittgenstein. He taught high school math and theology. He was one of those young, cool teachers students loved. He rode his Harley to school, blasted heavy metal from a turntable, decorated his classroom with a foosball table, a dartboard, a Hot Wheels racetrack, and rock posters. Here's Karabulad in 1985, firing up students at a pep rally before a game against rival Walsh High. For 5 minutes, he talks about a 19th century Albert Ryder painting titled The Racetrack and Viktor Frankl's Holocaust memoir, Man's Search for Meaning, and then segues to the football team's hard work.
I want you to understand how much work and time has gone on into this program. Today I calculated it. For every offensive play that you see out there tonight by us, it represents over 1 year period of time, 25 hours of work. That's for every play. Now I'm asking you, do you want to beat Walsh? I can't hear you.
Alas, Hoban couldn't stop Walsh's Scott Rico, who rushed for 99 yards and 3 touchdowns as the Warriors beat the Knights 26-0. In January 1988, just a few months before Reynolds would set the world record, Karabulad died of a heart attack. He was just 43. More than 1,200 mourners attended the funeral, a former student of his wrote, and a eulogist read the lyrics to Pink Floyd's On the Turning Away, a song about helping others. After his death, the Akron Beacon-Journal started the Clem Karabulad Memorial Coach of the Year Award. Josh, what's your Clem Karabulad?
Tennis's second Grand Slam of the season, the French Open, was much of the time a chaotic mess. It rained pretty much constantly throughout the first week. Novak Djokovic ended up finishing his third-round match against Lorenzo Musetti after 3 a.m. local time, a finish that led Coco Gauff, among others, to say that the sport as a whole needs to do more to protect the health and safety of its players. Coincidentally or not, Djokovic tore the meniscus in his right knee in his next match, forcing him to withdraw from the tournament and get surgery. He'll be back this season, more likely than not, but Rafael Nadal's future is in more doubt after the 14-time champ played what could have been his last French Open. Nadal, who's 38 years old and coming back from a series of injuries, got one of the toughest possible draws at the French, coming up against number 4 seed Alexander Zverev. And this time, the German Zverev got the better of him, winning in straight sets to drop Nadal's career record at Roland Garros to 112-4. For a lot of tennis watchers, including me, it was a grim result, with one of the legends of the game going down to a man who's been credibly accused of domestic abuse multiple times and nevertheless been allowed to continue to play in a sport that, virtually alone among its professional counterparts, has no domestic violence policy. Some of the accusations against Zverev, as I've discussed before, were first reported by Ben Rothenberg in Slate. Ben spoke to Zverev's ex-girlfriend, Olya Sharapova, who told him that the tennis star punched her and suffocated her under a pillow, allegations that Zverev has denied despite documentary evidence to support her claims. And it should be said, the men's pro tour, the ATP, investigated the allegations for 9 months before claiming there was insufficient evidence to punish Zverev. In addition to Sharapova, another woman, Brenda Petea, the mother of Zverev's child, accused him of pushing her against a wall and choking her. Last fall, a German court issued what's called a penalty order against Zverev and fined him 450,000 euros in connection to the Petea case. As The Athletic's Matthew Futterman recently explained, in Germany, a prosecutor can seek a penalty order on cases it considers simple, because there is compelling evidence that it should not require a trial, or cases for which the possible punishment does not amount to more than 1 year in prison. Zverev, though, contested the penalty order, and a trial began in Germany on May 31st, that is, during the French Open, as Zverev was winning match after match. In his report on the trial for the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle, Jonathan Crane wrote that Zverev's lawyer tried to portray Petea as fame and money hungry, saying, above all, her behavior was to increase her followers on Instagram and TikTok and live a jet-set lifestyle. So that's how things started in the German court, and this is how they ended. A week later, the two sides chose to end the proceeding without a finding of guilt or innocence. That's important. They ended it without a finding of guilt or innocence and instead reached an out-of-court settlement. Both sides declined to reveal the terms of that agreement, including if there was any financial compensation involved. But one of Petea's lawyers said that her side had applied for the settlement, had instigated it, because their young daughter was really suffering, and now they can get on with their lives. Another of her lawyers had this to say: she is not money hungry. That is simply not true. Zverev had his say, too, in his post-match press conference after he won his French Open semifinal against Casper Ruud. Let's listen to the reporter's question and then Zverev's response.
Any reservations on your part that you came to a settlement and that you didn't have a chance for the court in Berlin to say that you were innocent of all the charges?
That's what dropping the case is. That is innocence. They're not going to drop the case if you're guilty. At the end of the day, I don't know what translations you have, but that's what it means. Done. We move on. I never, ever want to hear another question about the subject again. That goes out to everybody.
There was a Q&A before that where when he was asked about what had happened in Germany, Zverev said, "I told you so." meaning that he had told reporters that he was going to, I guess, in his view, be declared innocent. But what he said there is totally wrong. He was not declared innocent. But old cynical me is guessing that, how the sport and most of the people respond will cover it that way, that they'll treat this out-of-court settlement like it's all just over, maybe even that it never really happened. And now we can just focus on the tennis stuff. About that tennis stuff, Zverev lost the French Open final in 5 sets to Carlos Alcaraz on Sunday, failing again to win his first ever Grand Slam title. I wouldn't call that justice, but in this sport, with this player, it seems like the best anyone can really hope for. And oh, by the way, Iga Swiatek won her 4th French Open title on Saturday. She's pretty damn great. Maybe I should have just talked about her. Maybe next tournament.
That was great, Josh, and I'm glad you took the time to talk about it. It's why I root against Zverev, and it's why a lot of people, I think, root against Zverev. This resolved one case against him, one of the allegations. What about the other charges involving Zverev that Ben wrote about for Slate?
There were never any charges in a legal sense. She never brought... There was never a criminal case against him, and she chose not to pursue it in court. What she said in the piece was that she just wanted to tell the truth, that she just wanted people to know her story. So, that this is it. I think from a criminal, even a civil standpoint, as far as we know.
I'm actually sort of surprised that he took the time to address it in the way that he did at that press conference, right? Because, you could just... It sort of highlights to the arrogance, I think, a little bit that like, hey, I was found innocent, which is, he's lying about the result here, but also just bullying reporters into being like, don't ask me about this again, right? It's such sort of an audacious way to take that on. Like, there's just no humility, no like, this isn't the time to talk about that. It's just like, don't you ask me about that again. I can't pretend that I know this guy or follow his career that well. But it just, you could hear a lot in that response right there. But great Afterball, Josh.
He's claimed the whole time that he's been railroaded. He's denied every accusation against him. And when the Brenda Petea accusations became public originally, he said, with no kind of follow-up or explanation when asked about it, that you would have to have a low IQ not to understand what's going on here. And so, for him, I think he sees this, and you heard it, as total vindication. And I think he was trying to intimidate the journalists. And these are journalists, most of whom, not to be critical, but just, they're in this to cover tennis. And so I think you don't need probably that much of a nudge to not ask him about this anymore. And so that's kind of my prediction for what's going to happen. I think that this is going to go away, and people will probably forget that, except for fans. And that's the thing. Just my final thought is that the real grim thing here is that this was probably likely the last time Rafael Nadal was ever at the French Open. Stronger connection between him and that event and that place than any other athlete in any other place in modern sports history. And if you wanted to engage with that, if you wanted to follow it, if you wanted to see him, you had to watch this guy. Like, you had no choice but to watch him go down to defeat to this character. And that's like, I think unfortunate is like not a strong enough word, but that's just what the reality was. That is all for this episode, but we also got a bonus episode that's live right now where we discuss the Lakers coaching search, Dan Hurley, JJ Redick. To hear about them, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We'll see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Joel Anderson and Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.